This is Michael Saltzman from Blue Sky Bio. Welcome to everybody who's joining us for today's webinar presentation. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this presentation. Today, we're going to be continuing with the Everything Blue Sky Plan webinar series. Today, we are going to be giving the 7th presentation of this webinar series, and we're going to be presenting on the topic of creating an ortho plan for a line of fabrication. For those of you who have attended the previous webinar presentations, same introductory points. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box next to the video screen, and please make sure to fill out the webinar attendance forms that we can send you the CE credit, which should arrive via email within 1 week of the presentation. The first 6 presentations are recorded and are available on the blueskyplan.com website. It's also available via YouTube. We discussed introduction to guided surgery, about CBCT scans and loading different surfaces and how the software works in their views and their layout. We discussed creating a surgical guide based on a model using the wizard. We discussed creating a surgical guide using the impression inversion, or otherwise known as the Ferguson technique. We discussed different features and functionality in the normal mode, custom surgical guide fabrication, and surgical guide fabrication for edentulous arches. Okay, today we're going to be continuing the series with the 7th presentation on the orthodontics module integrated into Blue Sky Plan software. We're using build 425, which is public on the Blue Sky Bio website. Includes a lot of new features and functionalities, including 2-jaw ortho planning, which is going to be the focus of today's presentation. Ortho exports from Blue Sky Plan are currently free. They're completely free, and it's going to stay that way until at least the end of September, after which time the cost per jaw is probably going to rise to around half of an STL export. So if you're doing a 2-jaw case, it will be 1 full export. We also have made the possibility of editing different surfaces such as CT and STL and exporting them from Blue Sky Plan after editing them at no charge. And that's going to be relevant for today's presentation. We're going to see in just a minute. So you could go ahead, you could load different surfaces, you could invert impressions, you could cut models, you could add bases, you could convert CT to an STL. You could do all of that stuff. You could export it from Blue Sky Plan at no charge. Until you create a surgical guide, exports are free. And that's going to be important. We're going to see that in just a minute in today's presentation. Let's go ahead and bring up the Blue Sky Plan software. We're currently looking at the software in the surgical guide module, and we're going to use the surgical guide module to edit and manipulate our models to prepare them for the ortho planning. Now, this could be done in Blue Sky Plan. It could be done in other softwares as well. You could use the software that you're using to acquire the scan. Since the exports are free from Blue Sky Plan, as we've discussed, it's very convenient and very easy to do the editing and then export directly in Blue Sky Plan to get the models ready for the ortho planning. So we're going to start our case. We're going to take the original scan models, and I've organized this on my desktop. We're going to refer to the patient as GG, and I've organized it to create a folder with the original scan, and we're going to be adding folders during the presentation, but we're going to keep everything very organized underneath the patient's folders. That's always a good idea. Let's go ahead and multi-select the upper and lower. And one way of loading the models directly into the Blue Sky Plan software is just dragging and dropping them directly into the software. They're going to appear in the software and they're going to retain their positioning. So if they were in occlusion, then they're going to appear in the software still in occlusion. Now that we have the models in the software, we're going to go ahead and do some editing, and that's going to be done via the surfaces panel. So if you've attended the previous webinar presentations, you're very familiar with the different panels we have in the software and our surfaces panel. If not, if this is your first presentation you're watching, you just go ahead and click on the icon in the horizontal toolbar for the drop down for the panels and go ahead and select surfaces. Now we're going to be using the cutting tool and we're going to clean up these models. The point of cleaning up the models is you want to have nice clean prints. You don't want to have excess material. When you're adding a base in the Ortho module, you want to add a base from the point of where the teeth meet the gingiva. You don't want to be adding a base from where the material protrudes upwards or downwards. You want to get rid of all of this excess material. So to do so, we're going to be using the cut tool and the cut functionality. A couple of points when you're using the cut tool to make sure everything works as expected. When you use the cut tool, select the model so that it's highlighted in blue. Make sure it's visible and make sure you're cutting the model that's selected. If we went now and tried to cut the lower model, we'd have a problem. If we didn't have any model selected, then that wouldn't work either. So confirm that you're selecting the correct model, confirm that it's visible, and then go ahead and press the cut button. We're going to find the positioning a little bit below where the teeth meet the gingiva. We're going to left click, we're going to swoop around here, and what we could do is we could create a very flat horizontal line, which is going to create our cut for us. And we just release the mouse button and the cut happens. We get this warning on the screen saying that the model wasn't closed. That's fine, it wasn't a closed model. In future releases, we're going to have the option of not having that message show up. But for now, you just click the OK button and all is good. We're going to repeat the process for the lower model. Again, make sure to select the relevant model. Make sure it's visible. Find the relevant vertical positioning. Swoop around. Create your flat line. And then go ahead and perform the cut. Now we're going to do 3 cuts here. One is to reduce the height as we did just now. Another one, we're going to remove any excess material that's on the interior of the model. And the third cut, we're going to do in order to kind of flatten out the heels of this model. So let's go ahead, make sure we have the right model, select cut, right model, select cut. And we're going to just draw a curve along the interior over here. And we're going to cut out the extra material on the surface. We could spend some time cleaning it up. We could repeat the cut process to make it nicer and cleaner. The third type of cut that we're going to do is just to kind of square away the heels here so that when we go ahead and add a base later on, we'll have a good connection. Let's do it quickly on the other side as well. And again, what we're doing now is we're prepping the models, we're cleaning up the models so that when we start the ortho process, we're working with nice, clean models. Okay, we're moving on to the lower, make sure it's visible, make sure it's selected. Press cut. We could go ahead and delete some of this material here. Okay, and as I mentioned, this could be done more carefully, and we can repeat the cuts to get cleaner and better generated models. But at this point, for demonstration purposes, I think we're fine. So now we have 2 models that are in the software, and we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and export them from the surgical guide module so we could use them in the ortho module. And as I mentioned, this export is free. So we go to File, Export Data. we've added a new button, export separated files to a folder. Previously, in previous versions, if you wanted to export two different items from the software, you had to repeat the same process twice. Because if you had more than one item or more than one surface checked, then it exported them as a single STL file. So we've added in this extra checkbox, export separated files to a folder. So we have both of our surfaces checked, and we're going to click the export button. Let's go to our desktop. We have our patient GG folder, and here we're going to create a new subfolder, keep everything very organized, and we could call this, you can name it whatever you like. We're going to call it Ortho Ready. Select it and press the OK button. So now, let's bring up our folder again. We now have two folders, the original scan, and we have our Ortho Ready models. At this point, we don't need to save this plan anymore. We've exported the data that we need, and we could go ahead and close it without saving it. If you want to save it, you could save it. Obviously, there's no extra cost or any extra bother involved, but let's go ahead and click the red X. We're going to discard it, and then we're going to switch over to the Ortho module. So now we're in the Ortho module. We have our drop-down quick access list of different modules here. We can also access it as we always did via the module drop-down that we have in the menus. Now we're going to go ahead and start our case. We're going to go to File, New Project, STL file only. We do have the option of importing the CT together with the STL if we want to get more data regarding the roots of the teeth. But for today's presentation, we're going to click STL only. We're going to our Ortho Ready folder, and we're going to select one of the models. Here, we're going to do it one at a time. We don't have the option to multi-select because we need to identify for the software which model this is. So now we have our mandible imported, and we have a button here, Import Opposing Arch. So we click Import Opposing Arch, and we choose Upper, and now we have both of our arches in the software. We have functionality to put the models into occlusion with buccal bite registration. We're going to discuss that in an upcoming webinar presentation where we go into the ortho functionality, more of the advanced functionality in more detail. But just so you know that that exists. Now we have these two checkboxes that are here throughout most of the process for show opposing arch and to visualize collisions. So they do exactly as you would expect them to do. And you should know that that functionality exists. And you could keep the collision visualization on even when you turn off show opposing arch. So that works as well. We're going to enter the patient's name or a unique ID. We're going to continue with GG to refer to the patient. And then we're going to press continue to draw alignment. Now, what we're going to be doing at this stage is we're going to be placing 2 dots on each tooth. And we're going to do it according to the highlighted tooth that appears in the diagram. So we're going to hold down the Shift key and left click. The diagram, the activated tooth in the diagram advances automatically as we go ahead and place the 2 dots on each tooth. On the corners and the buccal surface, the active tooth in the diagram advances automatically. Now this is important. This does a couple of things. First of all, it will orient the models properly for the ortho module so that the ortho module does its calculations and functions properly. It also helps with the segmentation, automatic segmentation of the teeth, which the software is going to propose. So it's important for that as well. In addition, it's also important for the snap to curve functionality, which we're going to see a bit later. So you do want to properly place these points. It gets everything working better and more efficiently in the software. Now, If you're at the stage or you have a missing tooth, what you do, instead of holding down the shift key and left clicking, is you hold down the shift key and right click, and it places a blue dot. And you can see that in the active diagram, the tooth has turned to blue. And to finish marking the right side of the jaw, we could either place two dots to indicate, whoops, I pressed the left button here. I'm going to click one tooth back, right click and right click to indicate the two missing teeth. And then we see that the software is advanced automatically to make the active tooth on the other side of the arch. Or another option, instead of placing those two blue dots, is just to click go to left side that we had previously. So again, the blue dots, you hold down the shift key and you right click, and that symbolizes that the teeth are missing. It's important just to make sure that the tooth that you are marking correlates to the tooth which is presented as active in the diagram on the screen. And we could go ahead and mark 2 points here on this tooth, even though it's partially cut off, that's fine. Once we've marked the teeth and we have the option one tooth back or clear all teeth if there is a problem with the marking, once we marked all the teeth, then we go ahead and click Finish Teeth Marking. And we're going to click Close Model. And that's going to add, it's going to close the model and it's going to add a base. That's one of the reasons we cut and edited the model before importing, is that we have the base added properly. We also have in Tools Preferences, you're able to control the base height. The closed model height by default it's 16, but just so you know that that setting and many other settings are here in the software. You could change the tooth notation and many other settings here in the software as well. So now we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process for the mandible. We're going to note the active tooth, and we're going to place 2 dots on each tooth. Now here we have our missing tooth. Okay, the model does not have this tooth, so we're going to hold down Shift, right click, and place that blue dot. Now we're going to continuing to mark the teeth. And we see how the active tooth advances automatically to the other side because we've accounted for all the teeth. And we're going to continue marking on the buccal corners of the teeth. Okay, click Finish Teeth Marking, click Close Model. Now we've marked both jaws, we've closed both models, and we're going to click Continue to Teeth Segmentation. The software is going to give a proposal for automatic tooth segmentation. And in the next step, we're going to review the proposal, edit the curves, and fine-tune the segmentation. So here we have it, and we're going to go tooth by tooth. You could do buccal side, then the lingual side, or reverse, or you could actually go tooth by tooth. We're going to left click on the active tooth. You can also left click on the tooth in the diagram. And we're going to review the segmentation that the software offers. Okay, I'm zooming in and out with my right mouse button, moving my mouse backwards and forwards. I'm rotating by left clicking and moving my mouse to grab and drag. And here what we're going to do is we could either grab a particular node to fine tune the placement, or more efficiently, just hold down the Shift key and just draw the line where you want it to be. This allows us to move pretty quickly around the teeth, doing whatever changes that we need. And even has the capability to draw a curve that's not even connecting the 2 nodes that are there. So you could just kind of freehand the line where you want it to be, and the software will move, such as this, the software will move the curve to that location. Now you can notice that between teeth, the curves overlap, and you want to keep that overlap positioning. That's important. The curves are on top of each other. They're merged. If they really overlapped so that the curves of the different teeth really overlapped each other, then you'd be creating an automatic IPR. And if the teeth were separated, then you'd be creating an automatic space between the teeth. So you want to keep the positioning that the software is offering, or at least be careful with how you go ahead and modify it so that the curves between the two different teeth are as unified as possible. Okay, I'm going to speed things up a bit. And again, we're left clicking on the tooth to make it active. Then we're holding down the shift key and left clicking to fine tune the placement of the curve. Now you want to do this for all the teeth, even if you're not going to be moving a tooth. You want to go ahead and improve the segmentation for all the teeth. This helps visually, it helps with the functionality of the software. So you want to go ahead and do this for all the teeth. And the next step, we'll be able to indicate which teeth are going to not be moved, which teeth are going to stay static, simply by right-clicking on the relevant tooth. And you can see how that becomes deactivated. So the segmentation, you want to improve on all the teeth. Once you do that, you could go ahead and right-click on teeth which are going to be static and are not going to be moved. So for this presentation, I turned off a whole bunch of teeth. We'll keep the anterior teeth active. And let's go ahead and do the same for the mandible. But first, we're going to go around and improve whatever segmentation needs to be improved. And of course, for real cases, a bit more time should be spent to improve the accuracy of these curves. But it's not a process that takes a very long time. And what you could also use is our new Lab Pronto functionalities. So even from the point when you just drop the models into the case, or even before you load them into Blue Sky Plan, you could take advantage of the Lab Pronto service. The Lab Pronto services orders that are passed through Lab Pronto are sent out to a network of qualified labs. The lab that has the time to immediately handle your case claims the job, gets it done, and returned back to you. Currently in the software, we have the functionality via Lab Pronto to order planning for ortho cases, for surgical guide cases, and the physical fabrication of aligners, the printing of the ortho models, and the surgical guides. So that's very easily accessible just by clicking Lab Pronto, choosing the service that you want, and submitting the case. We'll come back to that at the end. After we finish planning, we'll show how that functionality could be used to actually order the models or the aligners if you want to outsource that functionality. Okay, so we've improved the segmentation, and now we're going to go ahead and click Continue to Teeth Moving. Now, this does take a little bit of time. The software is processing all of the information. It's segmenting all of the teeth. It's going to create our gingiva base for us as well. So we're going to give the software a minute or two to process this. before moving on to the next steps. Now, what we can see, one of the things that the software is doing is it's inflating the gingiva. The software has a setting in it, and the first time you open an ortho module, it's going to ask you how much you would like the gingiva to be inflated. Different settings are 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, or 0.8 millimeters. The main idea is similar to a surgical guide. You want to create the spacing to make sure the liner could easily be inserted and removed from the model, from the patient's teeth, created from the model with that spacing so it could be inserted properly onto the patient. So you could select the desired option when you get that pop-up box the first time you open the ortho module. If you want to change it at any point, then you could go ahead and access that through our tools, preferences, and here's the gingival augmentation amount. And you could go ahead and click on change if you want to change that. So by default, it's we recommend 0.2. Right now, we have the teeth segmented, and we have the software that comes up, and it's proposing for us, it's placing for us this curve. And as an initial step for quick planning, we could simply click either snap tooth or snap all teeth. If we go ahead and click one of those buttons, we could see how the software goes ahead and moves the teeth to that location. Now, of course, it should be reviewed and should be fine-tuned. Any tooth can be clicked and selected, and we have the widget that shows up for that tooth. We have the option to manipulate the teeth either using tip or using torque. Right now we have tip selected. We can see that the widget is dropped down a bit lower than the tooth itself. It's properly positioned based on its location in the roots. And again, that's something that could be adjusted via preferences. Another way to move the widget or adjust the widget is just by clicking the adjust pivot button. Once you click the adjust pivot, you could fine-tune the placement of the widget so that it more properly aligns with the tooth, or you could raise it or lower it or move it side to side. So the ability to adjust the location of the widget exists just by clicking the adjust pivot button. When you click on the tooth and make it active, then you can see how the tooth has moved from its original positioning. And we also have a checkbox here for initial position. So you could actually click it and you could compare the initial model positioning to how the teeth have been modified. The number that shows up is our IPR, and we also see the visual representation of the red indicating that the teeth are conflicting with each other. We also have the ability to visualize the spacing between the teeth. And we can see that that shows up as a positive number as opposed to the IPR, which shows up as the negative number. So any tooth, the positioning of any tooth can be modified by using the widget to rotate the tooth and to move the tooth. We could work on adjusting the IPR. We could also add in a visual representation using a virtual tooth. And what this does is shows us how the tooth will move with its root. So when you add the virtual tooth, you have the ability to improve the alignment with the actual tooth. We also have a slider down here to change the draw transparency. And what this gives us is now if we rotate the tooth, to improve the positioning a little bit more. Okay. If we rotate the tooth, then we could see how, if we pivot the tooth, we could see how that affects the root positioning as well. We also always have the undo button that we have in the top left, so we could click that and undo it. So if we wanted to add multiple virtual teeth, we could just go around the arch, adding them, adjusting the position, and we'd have the visualization of the roots. Uncheck the checkbox to make it disappear. Okay, so let's say that this positioning of the teeth is sufficient for the mandible. We could click the box for maxilla. Here again, we still have the option of show opposing arch and collisions. And we could use the curve if we want to snap the teeth to the curve. If we think that the curve placement should be modified, we could just grab and drag any of the nodes. We could raise or lower the curve. And let's click snap all teeth. We could click on any tooth and see the movement for that particular tooth. We also have the drop down for limits, which gives us the option of monthly, bi-weekly, and weekly. So this isn't changing the total amount that any particular tooth is going to be moving. What it's doing is it's changing the number of models and the number of aligners, and it's affecting how aggressive any particular aligner is going to be when it's placed in the mouth. If they're monthly aligners, then they're going to more aggressively move the teeth. If we change it to bi-weekly or weekly, then the movement from aligner to aligner will be divided by 2 or divided by 4 accordingly. So the incremental tooth movement from aligner to aligner will be significantly less. There's also the option, the preferences to define what the maximum tooth movement should be from aligner to aligner. The defaults are there, but you're able to change them via tools and preferences. So that's based on the drop down that we have here for monthly, bi-weekly, or weekly. Once we've finished with all of our teeth positioning, then we click continue to edit steps. We currently have the maxilla active. So when we use the slider here, we could see how the teeth move from position to position. Let's switch to the mandible. Here we have a lot more steps. And we could see the teeth movement. Now, what these two columns are, the start step and mandatory, this allows us to define for any particular tooth when we want that tooth to start moving. So if you want a particular tooth movement to lag behind and only happen at a particular step, you could just check the relevant checkbox. After you make the change, click the refresh steps button, because it's definitely going to affect the computation that the software does. If you like to force a tooth to move or not to move in a particular step, then you could check the checkbox and then click refresh steps, and it will recalculate the positioning. Another functionality that we have here is that for any given step, and you can see that as we move through the slider, the relevant step is highlighted. In any given step, you could define what the tooth position you want to be at that step. So you could go ahead and you could edit the tooth placement in a particular step. And then, of course, click refresh steps for the software to recalculate that. So this might be helpful if you see there's a particularly high IPR during the tooth movement, and you want to make sure that as one tooth moves, it's not conflicting with another tooth. And as you're going through the different steps, you see the IPR calculation. So you could decide that at step 3, this tooth, you're going to move over the positioning and make sure it doesn't conflict to reduce the IPR. and of course hit the refresh steps afterwards so that the software could recalculate everything. On the bottom of this particular panel, we have different options. We could add buttons, we could add brackets, and we could design aligners. Right now, the functionality in the software exists to design aligners. I think the printers and the materials have to progress a bit before we could actually print the aligners themselves, but the functionality already exists in the software. And in an upcoming future release, we're going to have another option here to create an intermediate bracket transfer, the IBT, which will be able to be designed directly in the software. For now, we're going to have the option for add buttons selected, and we're going to press continue to add buttons. Adding a button is very easy. You right click on a tooth and you click add button. Select the relevant button that you want. Very similar to other functionality that we have in the software for adding teeth and adding implants. You left click on the button that you want, small, medium, or large, press add, and it appears on the tooth. We could click it and have our normal widget appear to allow resizing of the button, allow rotation, or improved positioning of the button. Placing another button, you could right click and click either add button, which will allow you to select it from the pop-up, add previous button again, which will add the previous button again, or just to hide the ortho buttons altogether. Let's remove that and add previous button here. Okay, so that's very simply our add button functionality. You also have the checkbox here to show opposing arch and initial position, which is also very helpful at this stage because you could see how significant any particular tooth is moving. And then you could add the buttons accordingly. We could go ahead and do this on both jaws and repeat the process for our mandible as well. Once we're done with that stage, we're going to click continue to export models. What we're able to do at this stage is add a base to allow vertical printing of the models. I right-clicked on the heel of the model, and if you remember at the beginning, one of the cuts that we did, or one of the cleanups of the models that we did, was in order to flatten this out a bit. We're going to click Add Platform, and the software places a platform. And as always, we could go ahead and fine-tune the positioning and the size. We don't want it to be too big because it's just going to add printing material. We don't want it to be too small. And we do want the base to overlap the model a bit. And we have the option of locking the placement. So once we're happy with how it's placed, we could go ahead and click lock so that everything rotates and moves together. What we're also able to do at this stage is add a label. So our label text we can enter into the box here. What we do is we click show label, and the software is going to emboss the label along with the number of the relevant model of the relevant step. So we position it on the model in the location that we like, and we control the size simply by zooming in and zooming out of the model itself. And once we have the proper location that we would like. We press the apply button. And the software is going to emboss the text onto each of the models. Now you'll repeat the process for the relevant jaws. We could switch to the mandible and repeat the process in the mandible. And what's important to know as well is that when you export, you're exporting the relevant jaw. We have the slider, so you can actually see each model with the relevant step. You could see the label and how that changes. You could see how the teeth are moving from model to model. And when you're ready, you press the export button. So if you remember, we had our patient GG folder, and we're going to add here a new folder for export in models, maxilla, and press OK. The software is going to go ahead and export these, and we can repeat the process. We could repeat the process for the mandible as well. Let's bring up our folders here. So now we have within our patient GG, we have original scan, we have an ortho ready models, and we have our exported models maxilla. We could go ahead and repeat the process for the mandible and create another folder here for exported models for mandible. Since it came out to 29 different models for this case, I'm not gonna do it currently and have the computer process and all of us waiting. Okay, so here we can see that the models have been created. Our 0 is our original model. So if you're adding buttons to the models, and the first model, the model 0, could be used to fabricate, to place properly the buttons. And then we have each of our additional models, and these could go ahead and be positioned for printing. So if I go ahead and let's close this a second. If I open up the Rayware software, and this is for the Moonray printer that's available on the Blue Sky Bio website, a printer that we carry and we distribute. It could be ordered directly from blueskybio.com. The software for it is the Rayware software. And just quickly to demonstrate, let's take a few of these models, drag them into the software. And we can see that these have our bases on them. Left click. This functionality allows us to select the bottom surface. And then we have the option to rotate the models either based on the buttons here or grab and dragging, and we could use the widget here to rotate the models. For our next model as well, we could click on it, select the bottom base. Next model, click on it, select the bottom base. Use the rotation functionality. And just improve the layout on our print bed for the printing of these models. So the models that could be generated and exported from the Blue Sky Plan software, of course, could be printed directly in the, from the software on your 3D printer. Now, we also discussed, let's say you don't have a 3D printer. What's the fastest way to get these printed, or just to order the liners directly? And that's really through the Lab Pronto functionality. And as I mentioned earlier, what the Lab Pronto functionality does is it sends out the order to a network of approved labs. The lab that has the time available will claim the order, will process it, and turn it around. The turnaround time is very good. For digital services, it's usually done within a few hours. For physical services, physical orders, it takes more time to print and to ship. So that needs to be taken into consideration. But if we wanted to order, let's say, aligners for this case, we would select order ortho aligners or models. This software asks if you want to save the case, because what it's going to do is going to automatically attach the case. So before doing that, it needs to ask you if you want to save the case. So we're going to click yes, and we're going to put it into our patient GG folder, and we could change the name to ortho plan, orthodontics case. We could keep it as it is, and then we're going to click OK to save it. Once the case is saved, the order form opens up. It starts automatically attaching the file to the order form. This is the order form for aligners or models. So you're able to select from the drop-down exactly what you want to order. If you want to order the model printing and aligner fabrication, and the price is here, or to export the models and have those printed and fabricate the aligners on your own. For whichever service you select, you have selected service details. You could read here exactly what's included and what's not included in the particular service that you're aware of it. You select the relevant number of models, and that information we saw was in the software. We could see here model step 5 for the maxilla. So there are 5 models for the maxilla. We could switch to the mandible and see how many models there. You select the relevant number of models. Let's say we're just doing the maxilla. The price updates. The file gets attached, and you would simply put in whatever comments or notes you want to send out along with the case, and press the order now button, and that's it. The order is processed. Your shipping address and your payment information and your primary contact details, you put that in one time. The software saves everything, so each additional order, you don't need to worry about that. All the information is already in there. You just select service, add any comments or notes regarding the order, attach the files, and as we see, if the case was already open, then it gets attached automatically, and you press the order now button. I'm going to go ahead and close this. 2 other things that I want to touch upon is the ability to create a report. Click the Create Report button. The software is going to automatically generate and create a PDF, and we could save that to our same favorite folder and press OK. The software generates the report. It puts in information, puts in a picture, a screenshot, has information regarding existing IPR, the movement for each stage, for each relevant tooth, and all of this is in a PDF that could be printed or saved or put in the patient's file and referenced for future. And of course, it could be accessed from the software from the case at any time. Let's go ahead and press the back button a few times. And we're going to take a look at the functionality to add brackets. So currently in the software, we don't yet have a release with the IBT functionality, but the model with the brackets could, of course, be exported from the software, and an IBT could created, a physical one could be created manually at this point of time. So the functionality to add brackets, we simply go to the radio button, add brackets, and press continue to add brackets. The software brings up this curve going around the jaw, and this curve is going to represent the positioning of where the brackets are placed. So if we like the curve, let's accept this for now and press add all brackets. We currently have 2 bracket systems, but just like we have in the surgical guide module, where we now have a long list of implants. We are going to be adding additional bracket systems, and we invite bracket manufacturers to contact us to add your brackets to the software as well. We could deselect teeth if we don't want brackets added to all the teeth. Right now, all the teeth are selected. The curve was automatically placed. The teeth are automatically all selected, and we press add, and the brackets are automatically added. Any bracket, of course, could be clicked. We get our familiar widget showing up, and the positioning could be fine-tuned. If we wanted to fine-tune the positioning of the curve in its entirety, then we could pivot the curve by using our pivot widget, and we can also grab and drag and move the entire curve. So once we have the brackets on the teeth, we could then go back or continue to our export models, and we could follow the same export process flow that we presented earlier. We can emboss the text, we could add the platform, and we could export the models with the brackets. They'll be exported attached to each other, each model with the brackets as an STL file. And that could be used if we want to manually fabricate a physical IBT at this point of time. Oh, great questions are coming in. If there are more questions, then please enter them. So let me clarify. Right now, the exports are free. At the end of September, through the end of September, exports are going to stay free, after which time the cost is going to go up probably to half of an export per jaw. Okay, that's the upper or the lower. It doesn't matter how many models or how many aligners you're exporting from the case. It's still half of an export. And we intentionally kept the price quite low because we understand that a fair amount of cases have to be modified during the patient's treatment, and new models have to be taken and imported into the software, and the plan has to be updated. So it's half of an export per jaw, and if you need to redo the case, then the fee goes up to just one export per jaw. And if you don't need to redo the case, then it stays at half of the export. So we intentionally kept the price quite reasonable. So even in a situation where the plan has to be modified during the patient's treatment and you have to redo the planning with new models, the maximum that you're going to be paying for a particular arch or particular jaw is going to be one export, similar to fabricating a surgical guide. So again, that's irrelevant of the number of models you're exporting, and it's irrelevant of the number of aligners you're going to be exporting, or if you're creating an IBT or not. It's half of an export per jaw. If it's an upper and lower together, and you're exporting both the upper and the lower, then it's going to be a full export, half for each jaw, combined one export. IPR reduction. So we've demonstrated that by moving the teeth, you could reduce the IPR. We're also improving in a future release in the not too distant future that we're improving the algorithms that when you snap it to curve, the IPR is going to be reduced to the maximum as much as possible. And here you have a setting. You have a setting here for the maximum allowed IPR for the anterior and the posterior teeth. So you could change it if you want it to be more sensitive or less sensitive in terms of when you use that snap to curve functionality, how much IPR you want to allow or how much IPR you want to tolerate. Okay. We're going to have a follow-up webinar presentation in a few weeks that's going to go into the ortho functionality in more detail, adjusting more of the settings. We're going to take a look at the functionality of changing some of the default settings and how it affects the number of steps and how it affects the number of models and aligners. We're going to go into the buckle bite functionality in more detail. The purpose of this webinar presentation was to show the process flow and how the functionality works. The next webinar presentation is going to go into a bit more detail about some of the more advanced functionality within the Ortho module. Upcoming releases relevant to the Ortho module are going to include the IBT fabrication directly in the software. You'll be able to export the bracket transfer guide as well. And we're going to be, like I mentioned, improving the reduction of the IPR. The truth is we have a very attractive and aggressive list of features and functionalities that we're going to be adding to Ortho. So really stay tuned. We'll be announcing them as they come out. But those two functionalities are some of the immediate ones that are going to be coming up in future releases. If you have any feedback regarding the Ortho functionality or any comments or any suggestions, we're always interested in hearing. We're interested in hearing about problems also so we can fix them, but we're interested in hearing about any feedback, comments, or suggestions so that we can continue to improve and continue to build functionality that our users want. So my contact information is on the screen. You could email me directly. I'm also very interested in hearing if you have any suggestions for future webinar presentations, or if you have any comments or criticisms or feedback regarding the existing presentations. Oh, I'm showing the wrong screen here. There we go. Regarding existing presentations. I also just want to show our Blue Sky Plan website, because one of the things that are included in the website that I think is not really taken advantage of is that we have a very rich education section that's giving free tutorials and free education based on the topic. We have to jump to the relevant section quickly, or you could just scroll down, but we have a wealth of information here that's being offered at no charge. I know that other suggestions or to create a portal that's charged and give out the, and make the videos something that has to be paid for, but we're including it here and we're really releasing it at no cost. So there's a lot of different courses and a lot of information that could be seen directly here. We also have information regarding our upcoming webinars. You can register and see them, and also the past recording webinars, which are very valuable because, again, they're covering a lot of very important information. And the point of this current webinar series of Everything Blue Sky Plan is to show the step-by-step processes that are discussed in a lot of other more clinically focused presentations. So we have fantastic speakers that have given many different presentations on many different topics in the first half of 2018, also in previous years as well. And the webinar series I'm giving now, again, is to take a lot of those topics that were discussed and show this step-by-step in the Blue Sky Plan software. We have more additional software releases planned for this year, so we'll be announcing them and the new features and functionalities as they come out. So we've wrapped up today's presentation. Thanks to everybody who attended and took time out of your busy schedule to watch the webinar presentation. Please scroll up to the top of the chat box and enter your details into the webinar attendance form so that we could send you the CE credits. And please send me any feedback, suggestions, comments, criticisms about the software, about the webinars. We love hearing feedback. And Lab Pronto, we've gotten a lot of great feedback from users that have been using it. We're building that out as well, adding a lot more functionality to improve turnaround time, delivery options, a backend for doctors to see which cases are in the pipeline, where they stand in the pipeline, what's been completed already. So Lab Pronto has a lot of capabilities, and we're continuing to improve that functionality as well. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.